Representative Dan Crenshaw serves in the U.S. House of Representatives. He's a retired Navy SEAL and lost his right eye when he was hit by an IED blast in Afghanistan. He retired with 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, and the Navy Commendation Medal with Valor. Crenshaw has served Texas's 2nd Congressional District since January 2019. Today, we'll review some of the congressional hearings that Crenshaw has participated in, where he fought for conservative ideals and common sense legislation. Our first clip is Crenshaw taking the head of the Department of Health and Human Services to task over their advocacy for gender-affirming care for minors.
I'm only focused on 2 pages. I'm focused on 2 pages of HHS guidance on quite a controversial subject. Well, it's controversial up here. It's actually not very controversial in the public. It involves gender-affirming care on young people, on children, on minors. It's not controversial in the public. 70% think that we should not do gender-affirming care and hormone therapy, puberty blockers on children under 18. I bet that number is much higher if you ask them about, a double mastectomy on a 12-year-old girl. And yet, HHS guidance, it's only 2 pages, is very clear in what HHS believes, which is that gender-affirming care is great. There's nothing but good things coming out of gender-affirming care. You should just believe a child immediately if they say they're a different gender and put them first on puberty blockers, a month later on hormones, and then put them in the physical body that they believe they should be in. I mean, that's very, very radical stuff and obviously very consequential. You're making permanent physiological changes to a child, and you would think that if you're gonna do something like that, that we would have an unbelievable amount of evidence to show that it indeed results in positive outcomes. I mean, you'd agree with that at least, right? That you'd want the evidence.
So first, Congressman, I have to say that nowhere what you've described do we say in any document from HHS. We do not make these flat statements, as you've said.
All right,
what we
I'll
do
read
is
it.
say we follow what the medical practitioners
I'll read it.
say,
I'll
the
read it for you.
science.
If you don't believe me, I'll read it for you. So this is from HHS Office of Population Affairs. It says, it allows children, adolescents to focus on social transition and can increase their confidence while navigating the healthcare system. Research demonstrates that gender-affirming care improves the mental health and overall well-being of gender-diverse children and adolescents. Medical and psychological gender-affirming healthcare practices have demonstrated to yield lower rates of adverse mental health outcomes, build self-esteem, improve overall health quality for transgender, gender-diverse youth. Nowhere in here does it say there's any possibility of anything bad happening. Nothing negative at all in these 2 pages. It says that puberty blockers are reversible. There's really no evidence for that. Anytime you cite something in here, it's a study that is at the most recent is from 2021, all of which have very serious problems with them. They're all surveys, first of all. They're not really studies. There's not like a double-blind randomized control trial going on here. And in some cases, 14% actually received the hormones. And many of these studies are not even just on children, and most of the participants are over 18. So you can't really determine any kind of causation. And bottom line, none of them are systematic reviews. If nothing else, you might agree that systematic reviews are the gold standard of evidence, right? A systematic review, for anyone listening, doesn't mean a study, it means a systematic review of all of the studies. One just came out, like last week, the CAS review, which, we're just going to put up this diagram here. One of the things it pointed out was how all of these studies that have been cited by all of these radical ideological medical associations that are lying to parents and doctors showed how they cite each other in this sort of circular reasoning in order to make their point. And HHS should not fall victim to that. HHS you are relying on studies that match this much paper. These are the studies that you cite. This is the CAS review that just came out. That's a systematic review. That's the evidence that they're pushing out. That came from the British doctor, Hilary Cass. That's a huge difference in evidence. And that's a really big deal when we're talking about something as consequential as permanent physiological changes to children. I mean, right? Can I get maybe some agreement from you that you might want to take another look at this particular document from HHS, which is relying on old data, data that's from studies that have really been debunked in many ways. Can we at least look at it one more time?
Congressman, I can assure you that we look at all studies because the services that we provide are based on an understanding what the best available science and evidence are. When we talk about a standard of care, it's not something we make up. It's based on what the major medical associations, by the way, those radical associations you mentioned, many of your colleagues are members of those so-called radical medical associations.
Yeah, and they would probably
We
agree
rely-
that they become radicalized. Let me tell you something about standards of care.
Okay, so you don't want me to finish the answer to the
Let me
question?
talk. The Cass Review also studied, and they ranked 23 standards of care from all the countries. You know which ranked second to last? All of the ones you're citing here. The ones that you guys use. They ranked last as far as standard of care practice, as far as how good they are compared to other countries. That's a really damning statement from a systematic review from a very, very well-respected group of doctors. You are not relying on the best data. You're just not. And that is terrifying for our children.
It's unconscionable to think that the American health associations are continuing to push the narrative of the positive impact of gender affirming care for minors in the face of overwhelming evidence-based systematic reviews that have influenced countries such as Sweden, France, Belgium, Germany, Italy, Norway, Finland, and the UK that have all either removed or limited their support for gender affirming care due to insufficient evidence to prove the prolonged benefit of gender mutilation. This next clip is a great take on not only the crisis on the border, but also how we are treating illegal minors who claim to be of the opposite sex. Pay attention to how Crenshaw gets down to the nuts and bolts and speaks plainly, while the lib tries to filibuster his way through non-answer after non-answer.
Y'all have an impossible job. Maybe it'd be helpful for my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who keep vilifying the last administration to recognize that this is an impossible job. So I'm going to remain intellectually consistent, unlike my colleagues, and recognize that this is an impossible job. What makes it a lot more impossible is when there's a lot more unaccompanied minors coming over the border. If we're looking at fiscal years 2020 versus 2021, there was an 8-fold increase in unaccompanied minors coming across the border. It went from 15,000 to 122,000. And that wasn't some random occurrence because of COVID. That number has remained, actually increased in FY22 to 128,000, and in FY23, it is on track to again be at another 120,000. Wouldn't you agree? Wouldn't we rather live in a world where ORR is not required? It's basically this giant orphanage for people coming across, for children coming across our border. It would be better if it didn't have to exist. Of course, it does have to exist, but it would be better if it didn't, right?
Congressman, we face the prospect of having to provide the care, and we're going to do what we can.
Of course, but wouldn't you rather live in a world where you didn't even have to do that? Is it better for children or worse for children to go across an international border unaccompanied?
Of course it's worse.
Of course it's worse. Of course it's worse. So when we have an 8-fold increase, not only makes your job ever more impossible than it already was, it's a humanitarian crisis. I can't imagine what changed between the years 2020 and 2021. Does anybody have any, there was an election, right, and a lot of policy changes that created a magnet for unaccompanied minors to come across. And then all of these problems we're talking about with sponsorship and intake and trying to vet sponsors and child labor and sex trafficking, they become exponentially worse because there's an 8-fold increase in the number of kids actually coming across. So how about that? You guys are just trying to deal with it. I get that. I'm not going to vilify you the way my Democrat colleagues vilified your predecessors in the last administration, but I do have some specific questions just to help the kids through this about your policies. I was looking for some policy guidance on what to do when they go missing. It was actually much easier to find your LGBT guidance. This concerned me a little bit, maybe a lot a bit. The guidance says this: when making housing assignments for transgender or intersex youth, the care provider must consider the youth's gender self-identification. Care providers must not base housing assignment decisions of transgender or intersex youth solely on the identity documents or physical anatomy of the youth. So I want to just provide the following scenario. There's a 17-year-old boy, and I know you guys separate them by gender normally, right? I hope so. There's a 17-year-old boy, tells you all that he's a girl, does he automatically just get placed into the women's facilities? Is that how that process works?
Congressman, thanks for the question. At HHS, we have a legal obligation, a moral obligation as well, to safely and humanely care for all the.
Is that how the process works? Come on, I'm being really good faith. I'm acting in good faith with you. I hope that's not how the process works, right? Because 72% of the people that come across UACs are actually 15 and older. I mean, you can barely describe them as children.
And so we make sure that we provide all the children in our care with the human rights protections and freedom from discrimination and abuse that they're entitled
Right,
to.
so it is how that works. It shouldn't work that way, all right? That's at least one member of Congress telling you it should not work that way. It puts girls in danger, and I bet a lot of the girls are younger in age.
Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe. God bless, and I'll see you for the next one.